Right. Hello, everyone. So we are now at the stage where we're going to put paint on our Nycaloth. And first things first, mine's primed. I went with black. Uh, I because I'm going to get to places where I'm probably not going to get the brush in very easily, and this kind of figure kind of works quite well. Could be grey, whatever. I also did a couple of other things. I mentioned it last time that I might do something more to the base, and I did. So I'll just cover that very quickly. That I used some snippers and chopped much of the base away, so we just had some quite soft plastic, so nippers worked quite well. And then used some blue styrofoamy kind of stuff. Styrodur's got various names, but people use it to make buildings. And just raised him up slightly, glued that to this large, I think it was 6 centimeter Games Workshop round base. It looks neater and tidier. And owl dyed him. And once that was in, and once that was dry, I went in with just regular milliput. There are photos in the mess of what he looked like before being primed. And I just rolled little sausages and pressed the milliput all the way around and that kind of stuff, and then smoothed it out, and then used a rough stone to create texture. I also then had so much putty left over that I added little lumps to make, and in many ways that kind of adds to that D&D kind of feel. The end plan is to have a dark coloured base and some lava running through, just to add a bit of dramaticness to the base. And we kind of joked and discussed this the other day on one evening earlier in the week, and I've got the M4H heart in the base. I kind of pushed in, and that will look quite interesting when the base is dark, the lava is bright red and yellow coming through, and we'll hopefully see the M4H heart come through there. So
it'll look hot.
It will look. That will be. I mean, we are just hot here anyway, so there's no argument there. And also, very last minute decision to do this. It was fraught with danger, and I got away with it. I did, in fact, get the axe drilled. If you want to terrify yourself, we've already had a couple of discussions before recording about how horrific that is, because a couple of other people have tried it. Just to reinforce it, mine is actually removable at this point, which will help. I can plonk that in a pin vise to hold it later on, but for now, you can take that out. But if you're using a motor tool, which I did, I'm probably say use a pin vise by hand, because the motor tool almost melted this super soft plastic, and I could see it deforming as I was drilling it. So the actual, let's see, can't really see it, but the wire is actually bent inside in order to straighten the axe, which is a bit weird, but I got away with it. I was lucky, I think. But anyway, like I say, prime back. Right. And I've also went through the box of paints I've got and the paints that came with the figure. And just for the sake, I went through and made a little swatch chart. Kudos to RJ for giving the idea on other days. The only one I haven't got is I can't get the lid off one. It's kind of, you can see it's at an angle, and I've got rubbish hands and poor strength, and couldn't get it off at this point. It will come off, but I'm not going to need it today. I just get an idea of how the different paints worked, You can see what's interesting is the Banshee white I've got in here is actually a slightly grayer white than the pure white from the little tubs. The black pudding, daft name, that came in the box in the prismatic paints has got a slight blue tinge next to the black pot that came in the with the figure, so they may or may not have uses to us at some point in the future, but I just thought that was interesting to see. Who wouldn't know necessarily? You'd think Banshee white. So the Banshee white is a very, very off-white, even though we've also got an off-white. I've also got two silvers, which got there. So these are the ones prismatic, and these are the two colours which we'll hopefully use later in the process. But this will help me. Not something I would normally do, but just off camera. I haven't a clue what those names are because of the way these are laid out, so it will help me locate paints for what we're going to do. Right, next thing, I just want to share. I did some, I don't know if we can really, hang on. Can I see albums? Why can't I see albums? Oh, no, I can't. I will share later. I might be able to sort that out during the break. I did some research and searched Nycaloth on the internet and found a few images that I quite liked of digital CGI versions of Nycaloth, just to give an idea of colours. There's obviously the box art, or the example they've got on the box. And the example that I'm kind of liking is one that's got green skin, kind of a flesh-coloured belly, and kind of orange inside the wings, with the edges the same green. So going to kind of go along with those colours. I kind of like, I've always liked the orc look with a bit of human element to it, so I'm going to quite kind of do that. So that's indeed the plan. So yeah, paint and looking at my colours and what I want to go. I think what I'm going to do. Yeah, I'm going to start off with Goblin Green. Now, I found Goblin Green did need, when I was doing another good thing, out of all these colours, Goblin Green was probably the hardest to shake up. It didn't look like anything that's in the pot. Now, I've got a wet palette here. You could mix these up in there are other forms of palettes. I've got pill things that I save. These are nice ones because they've got a nice little palette-y shape to them. Some are better than others, but I do prefer to. Oh yeah, that's just before. Can't really see everyone. I'm just going to tilt the camera over. I have some tea, obviously, fresh water in a pot, and I just use a single kitchen paper folded over brush, and palette over here. When you're painting, do think about ergonomics of how you're painting. So I'm left-handed, so I'm going to go from water to whatever here and mix my paint there, and we'll see as we go how I thin my paints and how they look, and we'll try and do that. Now I've just these are always handy. I've said this before. I watch of these are bits of A4 card that I cut into squares, six pieces from an A4 sheet, and I use it when I'm painting to take the load of paint from my brush before I apply it to a model, and they're quite nice to look back on, actually, even some airbrushing bits and bobs I don't do a lot of. That's one from probably a World War II figure. What they end up doing is just seen the question. Wet palette, come to that in a minute. But I've got grey ones because if they're prime grey, I might test the colour on grey. If I've got black a primed figure, I'll use a black piece of card. The idea being that I can see how dilute, how thin my paint is before I apply it, because I can put it on here and all complete. A wet palette, you can buy wet palettes. This is a commercial wet palette, and it consists of a sponge. It's a shallow thing. With a sponge that's wet, moist. You can see the water around my finger when I press it, and a piece of parchment that sits on top. Water is wicked up through, moisture is wicked up through the parchment, and you mix the paint on here, and because there's a wicking of moisture underneath, the paint doesn't dry out quickly, and the commercial ones are sealed, so you can, if you're using paint, you can seal it and come back a day later, 2 days later, not too much longer later, but even a week later, and the paints will still be wet and you can use them. So that's kind of, you'll find them on, you can buy little ones, big ones, plus you can make them yourself. If you look on YouTube, I suspect there'll be plenty of how to with just some sponge and some, this is a commercial parchment which you buy to go with this particular one, but you can use greaseproof baking paper with in a Tupperware box with some sponge and water on top. So that's it in its most basic form if you wanted to make one yourself. And you'll see that come to life in a minute. Anyway, right. So it's desk. I didn't write my notes this time. So yeah, I'm going to get this goblin green. I'm just mixed it up. You can see how the colour of it is a bit of a different colour to what it looks like, which is why sticking it out was quite a good idea. And I'm also, I think I quite liked, assuming we all got the same stuff, I've got this German camo extra dark green, and that should make a reasonable shadow colour. Now the idea here,
come in the box, did it?
This, yeah, there's a box in the Nycaloth box. There's a bunch of these little,
camo green, green to have in there.
Yes, well, I think somebody said, I can't remember who it was, had done some research, and effectively the tubs are regular Vallejo colours. They've actually got the numbers on top, so I remember checking at the time that they matched. I've got some of the same colours up on my that I use regularly, and the DnD prismatic colours are Vallejo's game colour range, but just named for D&D purposes. So yeah, it's curious options, as it were, to have in the box itself names that have kind of got military connotation, and then have all these crazy goblin greens in the fold away kit. So yeah, I'm going to, just with this, the idea now is I'm going to just start blocking in the colours. This is a big beast of a figure. What I might do is, in terms of how we go, how long have we been going, Malcolm?
About 6 minutes.
Really? Okay.
No, 35 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to block things in and make it a little rather than just we're going to try and get a single base color on, I'm going to kind of do what is now known as a sketch. So dipping my brush in the water, and I'm just going to mix a little bit of both of those together.
If you haven't got a wet palette right now, I guess just do your best and then make one.
Yeah, like I say, if you've got a pill thing or the lid of a margarine tub, or even a tile, a ceramic tile, can be quite good to just mix these on. They'll dry quicker, but the exact colour at this point isn't critical. We just need a paint to go on it. What I'm probably going to do is go quite bright on the highlights at the end. So because this is a fantasy figure, we can go crazy. Where's that? That's going to light up there. And
what brush are you using, Rob?
I've got a size 2 here. I'm not using the one from because I think we established the 2 that came in the. I can't remember which one had the 2. I think there's the WizKids one, fine detail, multi-purpose, but they had kind of bent tops. But they're perfectly usable. I think this one, the one that came with the prismatic paints looks pretty decent. I'll probably end up using that, but I've just got one that's pretty big here because this is just coverage. And the way I look at things, or the way we kind of do things, is this initial layer of paint. We don't need it to be perfect. It will likely take a couple of coats to, because you'll see straight away there that you can see the black coming through it. Don't worry about that.
It's very watered down, isn't it? Well,
let's just show that here. So this is why this is useful for teaching purposes as well, is that you can see if I paint that on the black, you can see that's thinnish, but it's not super thin. When we get further through the painting process, we'll be going much thinner, but this is a good way of illustrating how thick that is. So if I do another pass of paint over half of it, you can see how that's now getting brighter on the overlap because there's now 2 layers there. And what you'll find is with painting with these acrylic paints is you can end up with a really lovely smooth surface, but it's better to do that in 2, maybe 3 passes of paint rather than trying to do a thick single coat, which will get globby and whatever. So, and another aspect of this as well with these paints is that they tend to if we try and do a second coat on an area that it's still wet, or in the process of drying, you will drag that paint and make it lumpy. So when you do your second coat, make sure that the bit you're painting on has dried, because it will work better for you in the end. Because this is quite a large figure, by the time you get to the point where you want to do the second coat, it will have dried by then because you've got such a large figure.
Clive says that the small pots are model colour, the bottles are game colour. Looking at using the numbers, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. Just like different range. And James says that there's a mixing palette in the box with.
Yeah. Hang on, Yeah, so the bit where the tubs come, there's actually a thing for a bottle of water, which I haven't done. And then you've got 3 little mixing pallets in there, but you could also use this here.
Yeah.
You could use the inside of the lid of the big box. There's lots of options. Because this could be sitting in a pill case. I think the first time when I painted that American tanker 3 years ago now, blimey, I used a pill case from to do that. So you'll also find that these things dry. It's quite a good idea to let these things dry as well, because you don't always get the colour that you think it is when you first apply the paint. It dries it might be darker. I can see that it's drying darker on his chest there.
Did you decide to go for green because of the box art, or?
I'm keeping it classical, and like I say, I'll try and get the photo or the image I found that's going to inspire the bulk of this painting. Because the spikes that come out of him will end up being a different colour, so I'm not worrying too much about getting that covered. Reminder again that my base is stuck to a bit of, I think it was talked about last time, the demijohn stoppers, because they're just nice and bulky, nice and comfortable to have in my hand. You can also see that clearly I did some priming today. Well, got primers now. So yeah, this is the mildly boring part of just watching somebody paint dry unless you're painting yourself. So
it's the restful parts where the magic happens.
Yeah, definitely. When you've had I've got bits here where my primer didn't get to, but that will survive. And I'm going for a classical green. I'm not going to overcomplicate this, but I'm going to make it a little bit more exciting than just all green. Like I say, I'm going to, when you see after the break, the flesh colour on the stomach, you'll get an idea of how I'm going to make this look. That it's going to be a little bit more than just
Mick would like to know if there's any advantage of airbrushing the base coat over the whole figure.
I don't know if there's any advantage. It's a method to do it. It's entirely an approach you could do. Personally, I've always been happy with what I can achieve by brush painting. Plus, I would spend more time. I prefer painting. I find the mellowness of painting and seeing this happen more enjoyable than then having to stress at cleaning my airbrush.
But if you guys really thin paint and it needs airbrush,
you can do the same thing. Yeah, you can base coat this very quickly with an airbrush. Yes, but what I'm going to do in a minute isn't something I could do so easily with an airbrush, because something I've been getting a clean base coat is might be. I mean, there's probably some little angles in here that you might struggle to get an airbrush in, under arms and things, that might be a bit trickier than getting round. So, when I'm trying to clean off the seam mold line, I'm sure if you guys were doing it, you may have found that some bits are really hard to get to because of these wings in the way. If you were to buy a kit, you would probably not put the wings on until you'd painted bits. Yeah, you probably wouldn't put those on until you had painted the back. So this creates some quite awkward shapes. And
That's what you need that bent brush for.
Yeah, that's why I didn't read the instructions. Nice one.
Well, give it 10 minutes, and then we'll take a break.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna, while this is happening as well, even laying something I did recently on my Monty bust, which I'd not done before, but I've always maintained, and it's probably true. Get your base coat on nicely. But what I've noticed a lot more now, and I've watched a few videos of some good painters, and they kind of do what they describe as sketches. So they, rather than kind of methodically go through each color, as it were, and I can kind of demonstrate this now. What I'm going to try and do with this guy is paint him as if it's usually called the zenithal lighting, so the light is coming from above, and although there is light landing on the figure, natural light around, small figures and miniature figures can look better by accentuating muscle shapes and folds in clothing and what. So just to illustrate that, here's a figure I actually did. This was a previous dude that was done for one of our sessions, and I haven't finished him, but you can see the highlights and folds in his uniform that I painted, the creases and things, and it just adds more visual interest and character to what would just be a plain physical shape. So the idea here, this guy will end up having brighter muscle groups and things. And just to illustrate that, I'm going to, over here, so I've got a mix of these two colors that I base coat in the process of base coating. And this will go part of a way to eventually explain blending. So now I can focus here. You can see how much lighter that is. And
is that just is that raw green?
That's raw goblin green, yeah.
Right.
And I'm just plonking that on the upper portion.
That's still very thin.
It's still thinnish. It's thicker than what we'll end up doing because we're base coating effectively here. But but I'm not putting it into all the recesses and the like. I'm just kind of putting it on some of these higher areas. We will end up making it look, and okay, so you look at his bicep here. You've got, if you think of the light coming down here, I'm going to plonk some light just on that upper portion there. So that bit's in not shadow, but it's just darker. I'm just, even with a big brush, I've still got a big brush in some of those higher areas, just at the top. So again,
so you're leaving all the recesses and shadows
still in shadow, yeah, and they'll get the really deeper recesses will get darker. The highlight bits here will get brighter, and it will end up making it look much softer in those kind of, from where it's there, which is darker, to that you can see there's a huge bright light change in that. But what I'll show you today and next time is how we can make that disappear. And let me just zoom in a little bit. And the important thing is that we know the paints we're using. If you are mixing overly complicated mixes, that becomes a tricky thing to do, because you can't always remember what paint you're using.
That's a good thing of a wet palette, isn't it? You can close it down, open it up a couple of days later, and it's still wet.
Yeah. So what I'm doing now is that just on his cheekbone, on his nose, he's got some little shapes on the top of his head. I'm just going to kind of, I'm not even, this is what we call loose sketching still, so I'm not too worried about them being perfect. They'll end up being refined along the way. Trust me, trust the process. We will, that will probably change colour. But the point is here, and remember, I'm still using a big brush, but it's got a nice point on it, so I can still get to, you can see the little nostrils either side of his nose. I can still put some paint on those. Top through his ear. I've got to be careful, or I'll be aware that his cheekbones kind of turn into spikes, which will eventually be a slightly different colour. I'm not going to try painting his eyes at this point in time. Maybe just a little bit on his chin there, on his upper part of his mouth.
I like all his wrinkles.
Yeah, just to, and that's quite ugly at the moment. It's not super fine and refined, but it will be. So I'm just kind of picking out the highlights. And I might, if I was to do this not on camera, I might do this a little bit more carefully. But I kind of want to make sure that we come away with something tonight as well. So I do want to get to the point where maybe on one part of this guy, we start to see some things happen. We start to see the proper highlights and shading happen.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll take a break there then, Rob.
Yeah, and, sure.
We'll be back. Well, the people watching at home usually won't see a difference, but we'll pause it
there. Yeah. Hello again. Right, I'm going to share some photos that I found online. He said, hopefully. I've made them famous. So where are they gone? What's going? I've done it. Oh, hang on. Got him. We're in. Right. Yeah. So I found these ones. So I'm gonna. Here we go. So this is some artwork I found, which is basically, it looks like this is the official artwork based on what we've got. So he's green. He's got kind of leathery brown wings, and he looks very much like our guy in the way he looks. This is another one I found. So under the description of Nycaloth, and he's quite cool. And he's quite fun with the lighting and whatever, and his wings almost look translucent, and gives you some ideas on how we can do the horns and stuff a different color. And I think my favorite is similar to the last guy, and this is where I'm kind of thinking elements of ours will go, or mine is going to go, is to give him that kind of fleshy colored belly, and the wings will be kind of orangey look, with the way they've modelled the skirt thing, loincloth thing. I don't know exactly what that is, but it could be something similar colour to that. So that's kind of a direction I'm going, and you can see the inside of the ears are going to have a kind of a fleshy colour to it. His lip is fleshy. He's got red eyes.
He's got pink nipples, Rob.
Oh yeah, got to get. I mean, they haven't done the nipples, but on ours, but we can definitely do nipples if that's. Well, I've painted nipples before. That's we can give the impression of 3D nipples on these guys easily enough. But yeah, that's the direction I'm going for. So in answer to the question of how far to go with the green, I'm not going to do. My plan isn't to do the full wings in all green, but certainly on the outside and whatever. But I might not do the outside yet until I've done the inside. So I'm going to concentrate on the main body of skin at the moment, and come to the rest of that later. So if hopefully that answers the question of how whether to do the whole thing. Ideally, do as much of a skin as you can. You can do the core parts of the arms and whatever over the wings if you want to, but it's probably not necessary at this point in time. So, and the other thing I was going to say, in terms of figure painting in general, when I'm painting figures, and I am usually painting World War II figures or historical figures, I'm usually painting humans, I would probably say, which means I usually paint them from the inside out. If you were to look at something in the order you paint something, so I would usually paint skin first, and if they're wearing a shirt underneath a battle dress or something, I'd paint the battle dress, the shirt first, and then the battle dress, and then the webbing and all that kind of stuff. Our guy here, Mr. Nycaloth, doesn't have that kind of structure we can go along. So, but I'm still starting with the skin, which happens to be most of the figure, which is kind of very much reversed to a historical piece. So I'm still on the palette. I'm still adding a bit of this and this together as I use more and more of this to paint the main parts. I'm not going to go through all of it for this, because I'm going to go back in a minute and do more of a shading, just to give you an idea of where we're going to go and how we're going to do it. But you can also already get an idea when you look at this, where I've used the goblin green on its own to start doing the upper surfaces, and you can see those kind of really sharp transitions between the base color I've put on, which is the two together here, and the pure goblin green, which will go brighter. We're going to add another color. I haven't quite decided what that's going to be yet, but we're going to add another color to bring those up in one or two places eventually.
So is the darkest color in the recesses of the skin going to be the one coat mixture between the two?
What I'm going to do now is take the camo green on its own, and I've put the green into the shadows already, the mix, but this is now a darker green on its own. but I'm thinning it a bit. So let's just go back to that. So you can see it's darker. It's still quite translucent. Let's see if I can demonstrate that on the back of a finger. It's quite watery, but it's got pigment in it, as it were. But it's maybe probably 30% paint, but I can't really say exactly. But what I'm going to do with that is it's thin. It's thinner than the original coat, and I'm just going to
more water than paint.
It's probably more water than paint, and at this point, I'm just going to go into the deepest. You think of the light coming down again from this angle. There's going to be bits in shadow. Your lamp might even show you which bits those are, and I'm just going to use this to paint those underside, the lower portions, in those darker, deeper recesses. I will eventually go even darker, but at this point, we're kind of just doing sort of a rough feel for it. Some areas in he's got some nice kind of tendony things going on in his neck. I'm just going to put some in there under his chin. We'll eventually get some into his cheekbones as well. Just kind of putting some into the recesses around his eyes, because eventually we'll hopefully end up with some nice glowing red eyes. But in order for them to glow nicely, it's good if they start off in a very dark place. So it might be that this doesn't necessarily jump out at you immediately that it's super dark, because it's not. We're not going the darkest tone yet. We're just accentuating those shadows.
Is that what you'd normally do, or would you normally sort of base coat it in the dark colour?
No, I would. I'm what I did on my Monty was kind of start off putting the flesh colours on, and then while I was working, before I'd refined it, just started putting a highlight colour on to the bits and pieces, and then some shadow. So I would do it kind of like this to get a feel where things are. You have a look at it and go, I like the way that shadow, I want to pick out some of these lines around this weird shoulder thing. So you can mix up these colours on the palette and apply them as we go. You could just as easily paint the whole. I mean, this is the thing again. There is no proper way of doing things. There are ways of doing things. So you could paint the entire thing. Sorry, lost it. You could paint the entire thing and in the base color and get that nice and covered. I'm definitely doing this for the purpose of demonstration. Like I say, I could happily have spent the entire evening just painting the base color on this and getting it nice and clean and smooth, but I want to show some evolution of shadows and stuff to make it. I know I'm not entertaining, but I do want to convey. Because you could concentrate on one bit and then in your own time go off and do other bits.
I guess if you concentrate on one bit, though, you're still going to have to wait for it to dry.
Yeah. But you can see already that there's some, the highlight areas are starting to show brighter. And we're still only using two. It's looking like this. It's got highlight areas appearing, it's got shadow areas appearing, and we've only used 2 colors so far.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add a little bit, just to illustrate, a little bit more water to the pure goblin green again. And this time I'm going to go on this shoulder. Yeah, that's that story, isn't it? Right, little bit of when you're paint and you're applying your paint with your brush. Just remember doing this before. It's a useful kind of lesson thing. Right. When you draw the brush across and you lift up your paint brush at the end, if you can see, I've left here more paint than down there. So you can see that the point at which I lift my brush off, I've left thicker paint because there's more paint there.
You've left a little puddle, Rob.
A little puddle, yeah. And we can use that to our advantage when we paint by that bit will end up at the bit we want to be brightest. So that might be the highlight tip. So we can paint with translucent paint, but we transfer that to the figure. And I've got an annoying rogue hair in my brush. It's quite annoying. So I can, again, you still don't need a lot of paint on it, but so I can run my brush upwards from starting at the lower portion that I want to be in shade, well, not in shade, but less intense, and paint upwards, and remove my brush at the top, which would be at the highlight portion, and leave a little bit more paint on there. And that's kind of, and I can do that again, coming from this lower portion there, going up. You can see a puddle. That's probably an extreme version, but you can see how we're using the nature of the paint to our advantage.
Yeah, I think that's the nature of acrylic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Water, yeah. Wow.
So you can do that and equally on his chest here, I'm coming away from the underarm portion, which will be in a little bit more shade, and bringing the brush out onto his breast. Got to say it like that because it's funny. And I'm effectively doing a very thin glaze, which raises interesting questions again on what's a glaze. And when we're painting figures, you will hear the word glaze. If you've done vehicles, you might be aware of filters. I kind of look at a filter is a consistent layer of paint that might change the color. I think if you're doing it on a vehicle, you might use a filter over top of a color. With a figure, I'm effectively using that same technique. So it's almost a single thickness of paint laid down as a glaze, but you're not covering the whole area. So I'm just doing this glaze, which is the thin paint, just on the highlight areas. of this, and that's going to eventually, if I just concentrate on this left-hand portion of his shoulder, and
I think that's going to go well with the question that Dave's just popped up. Is he says, as this is my first time using a wet palette, I've found the following: massively underestimated the amount of paint, so I've had to keep mixing, and this has led to different shades and different paint and water mix, so my base coat isn't nice and even. So he says, so should I do another base coat to get a better, more even coverage before the highlighting, or is it okay to proceed with the highlights and shades, as there will be more layers anyway?
Right, now that's a good question, because I'd probably say that I have changed my mind over that. Excuse me. I would have once said, yes, go and do. It's better to do 2, 3, 4 coats of thin paint to get to your to get a nice single clean base coat on, and then start thinking about doing your highlights and things over top. What I've started doing is this sketching thing that I'm doing here. So I'm putting highlights and things on as I go, just to get a feel on how they look, and knowing that they're still effectively doing layers, or more than one layer, but that more than one layer just happens to be brighter, lighter colours. So it's kind of a mixture of the two. It's almost an impatient way of painting, to see things happen and get a feel for what's going on, rather than getting a nice clean layer of paint on. So yes, in the first part of the question, if you ended up having really thin paint, definitely go back and add another layer, or another one, until you've got a nice clean one. But the areas I've painted here, my second layer has, in some cases, in the shadows, been the darker tone, and you kind of get into that single, or you kind of get in that base coat, but you're also at the same time doing the painting. You're doing
building up, aren't you? You're building up the layers anyway. Would you be worried though about the losing detail if you put too many layers on?
If your paint is thin, no. The key thing with acrylics, if you went, I would once, at a very basic level, get a good clean base coat on with two or three coats. Sounds like a good name for a paint brand. 2 thin coats is better than 1 thick coat, because with 1 thick coat you may well lose detail. With 2 thin coats, you'll probably get you probably would end up with the same coverage in terms of getting your base colour down, but you probably use thinner paint for both coats, that it ends up you've retained detail.
Okay.
And you could equally do 3 coats if that was what you felt was required. And then once you've got that clean base coat, you can go out and start doing shadows and highlights, and adding those I kind of think of it as a rendering effect. You're rendering these shapes and forms. You can see as I look at mine, you can see the shape, the way I picked out the upper portion of this flesh, which of this skin, I should say, because it's not flesh, is it? And one thing I'm seeing is that this goblin green does actually end up getting quite bright. so you can, let me just see. I don't know if I'm zoomed in. So to give you an idea of how mine's looking when I zoom right in, which is pretty cruel for anybody to do that, but you can see how if you're looking at this with a naked eye from a distance, it looks really quite cool. If you look at it up close, you can see the brush strokes. It's quite rough.
Yeah.
But
that's the idea, isn't it? You're blocking in those colours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The paint is still thin enough.
I think Dave was concerned that his blotch isn't covering very well, but I think your zoom here might put him at ease, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, it's as long as you aren't seeing the primer anymore, I guess, you've got paint on thick enough. So,
are you noticing any seams that you've missed or any holes?
Not on this bit. I know there are some underneath here, and I think I got most of mine. But other things, just to say, if we look at this area across his neck, his very thick neck, I can just do little brush strokes like that, going down to his shoulder, and you end up with a little brighter portion in the middle there. You can look down on the top, so I've only painted half his shoulder, or that crazy little almost layered armor bit on his neck, on his head, top of his head, going down to this bit that's still dry. You can see, obviously it's reflective there. So you're looking at a shape, or that's a kind of curved over shape, and I've just picked out that bit in the middle, and you can see there as well that where my paintbrush is just, I'm going top to bottom there, and it's paint's coming off at the bottom. It's quite weird, a little bit blotchy in places at this point in time, but that actually adds to the character and texture of this demonic alien skin.
I don't think they have any moisturizer in that plane of existence.
Nope.
Although weirdly, he does have baby lotion in some of his deeper recesses.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. Is that all right, Rob?
Okay. Yeah. I think. So you can see what I've done so far. I've not base coated everything so far. You can see how that's getting back to Dave's comment. That's quite thin. You can still see the black underneath. You turn it around, and some areas have got a little bit more. Yeah, that's probably got 2 coats of thin. I didn't do it perfectly round there because I was just going off to illustrate how and I haven't done round the whole of this weird arm bit here, so I've concentrated on this side, which is just mostly sorry, zoomed in. It's mostly the goblin green on its own, quite thin, added to those upper portions. Remember, I'm looking at it with light coming down from above. One of the things, though, although if you've got to the point where you put these highlights on, and if you think they look a little bit over the top, you don't like them, this is where you're very thin. Let me go back. Yeah, so I'm adding more water to the original mix of the two, which if I need, when I come to do more of the base coat on other portions of him, I can mix more. It will be close enough, so I'm not worried about over thinning that. Now, that's the bit that we had at the beginning. If I paint across there, you can see that there's green in it, but it's not quite so bright. It's really quite thin. You can see the light catching it, but it's thin. And what I can do is, with the paint with not too much paint on the brush, but still, I can go. I can now paint from my highlight, which is quite bright, into this original base color zone. Same principle, that the paintbrush will come off and leave paint. So I'm going to paint down over that original bit, and so more paint will come off my brush down here, and that will create that brighter green will soften a little bit with this original base color. We can do it down here as well, so painting down there, and those harsher edges will soften. You have to trust the drying process as well.
So the puddle of paint
is now in the shadow.
Yes, the puddle of paint is in the shadow, so that is. But the edges of that will blend. It won't be a hard edge, will it? Of that puddle. It
will soften. So you're doing it in the opposite direction, but with a darker color and thinner. So you'll end up with a less apparent transition.
Right.
So that's kind of what people would be talking about in terms of blending with acrylic paint. So you might see some people doing, for example, this bit on his neck there. You can actually see now. Can you see those little bright bits there? And when I was demonstrating that and lifting my paintbrush up, that's how that has dried, a little bit brighter. I quite like it, because it's, like I say, about his skin being a bit weird and alien-like. But even with that, with this thin bit of paint I've got on my brush, I can soften that with this thin. So even if you think you've gone too far in terms of a highlight, you think it's too bright, you can soften it either at the edges, as I'm doing here, just to soften that highlight into a softer, quite bright light's making it a bit bright, but you can see that's the bit where I've started this shadow shading bit, and here as well, that now looks a little bit softer than it did. And you could do this over the whole of your highlights, and they will soften down and not vanish, because your paint is still translucent. But you can reduce the intensity of it, and equally then you could then go back with your highlight and go over top. But but hopefully that's kind of illustrated some of the principles of highlighting and shading with acrylics in.
Yeah, definitely. I think people haven't seen this before. That'd be quite a groundbreaking technique, I think. What do you like people to do for the next one?
Well, I was kind of thinking about that while I let me just zoom back out again. Um, I would think that if you paint, uh, get the base color to a point everywhere that you're happy with, that you can see, yeah, get all the skin, because obviously I haven't done backs to his legs and under his bit there and the backs of his arms. I'm going to make sure I get that covered. Uh, I I could I could easily go off and do all of his skin this way and finish the skin. But I'm wondering if would it be better if I got them base coated and then next time did more of this highlighting and shadowing and maybe introduce the flesh colored tummy
Mm.
and do more highlighting in order to reinforce that.
Yeah, and so you could do the two colors base coat of all the skin ready for doing the belly next week.
Yeah, yeah. So just if you got to the point, I would say, yeah, base coat all the green. I'll put up the picture of where I'm going, but you don't have to do the flesh coloured belly that I'm going to do. And uh, if you want to experiment doing these highlights and shadows and do the whole thing, then do that. Feel free to practice and go as far as you like with it.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks, Rob. I'll pause it there, and we'll be back on the next episode.
Okie doke. Cheers
Cheers.
all.